Weencast, a Ween podcast with Rory Gibbons and Shane Prutzky.
Hey, what's up? This is Shane.
This is Rory.
And this is Weencast. And we welcome you.
How y'all doing out there?
How is everybody? Welcome to Weencast. Okay, so we're going to go back to doing one of our legacy shows, so to speak, one of the shows from our youth. We're going to go back in time, as Huey Lewis once said. So before we do that, we have a couple of shout-outs we'd like to make. First and foremost, we had mentioned at the beginning of our last episode that this show is now available on iTunes, and we are now available on Stitcher.
Yeah, check it out.
So I had said last time I didn't know anything about Stitcher, and I still don't, but we're on it. So it's it's basically just like a podcast app on your phone, as far as I can tell. So it's just like, if you don't get into the whole podcast on iTunes on your phone, it might be a little bit easier to just do it on Stitcher. You know, I don't know. But if you search for Ween, it will come right up as one of the podcasts about Ween. You don't have to scroll through any pages or anything like that. Just do a search for Ween. Comes right up. So it's awesome. And also, nice. I got the first Weencast gift. I had been messaging.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, totally. I had been messaging with a dude on Facebook, and he had mentioned to me that his father was actually in a band that opened for Ween and was on the Twin Tone label at one point, which is the same record label that put out God, Ween, Satan. And I was like, dude, that's awesome. And he was like, yeah, I'll hook you up. Like, I'll send you one of their albums. And I was like, oh, that's fucking awesome. So the band is called the Coupe de Grace. The Coupe, C-O-U-P-D-E, Grace, like a French kind of thing.
Coupe de Gras?
Yeah, it's like Coupe de Gras, exactly. That's what I've been calling it, but it's actually the Coupe de Grace. I'm sure that's kind of like what, they were going for. So it was really cool of him to send me that. It's the album that he sent me is called The Art of Survival. I don't know. I think he said it was their second album. I didn't do a whole lot of research into the band, but I did listen to the CD, and it's really cool. It's like an alternative rock with like a little bit of like a metal like edge. So thank you so much. Dude's name is Mike, and thank you so much for sending that to me. And if anybody else wants to send us anything, we're accepting of all gifts of any sort, and we really appreciate that. And
yeah, thank you very much, Mike.
So we're going to go back in time tonight, and we're going to talk about the end of the Painting the Town Brown tour. So this is going to be August 28th. We're almost 19 years to the date. 1999. The Electric Factory in Philadelphia. So we're back going to our local shows at the time, which was the Philly shows.
Back to Philly, and now at a new venue.
Back to Philly. They had played the Trocadero previous to this, and now this was sort of their step up in the world, so to speak. Their step up for the city of Philadelphia. So they're playing a bigger venue, which is the Electric Factory, a legendary rock club from way back, I guess, in the 60s. Really is when I don't know exactly when the place opened, but it was around. I know, I think Hendrix played there, and that was one of the places during the I think it was around since the 60s. I don't know. Do you know a little bit about it, Rory?
I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I know it's been, one of the consistent venues for a long time.
Yeah, the Electric Factory.
There's quite a few more venues that have sprouted up recently in the last 5 to 10 years or whatever. But when we went to see this show, I don't recall, there, it's like it was one of the venues in Philly.
Yeah, it's definitely just one of those things. It's like everyone just knows the name, the Electric Factory. It's just always been, especially at that time, was just always one of the best places to go, and just a legendary Philadelphia rock club, basically. So this is the first time that they had played there. And it's the last show on the Peyton the Town Brown tour. It was the last show of the summer. And we were there. You want to talk about a little bit about
indeed.
Getting down there?
Yeah, so first off, there were 2 cars, and so I was in a car coming from State College, and Shane was in a car coming from the Reading area. So I'll speak to my side of that. So I attended this show with, we drove down with a friend from State College, Leanne, and Matt. And that was actually funny recalling this because it's like a blast from the past. I, chat and, with Leanne from time to time, and sometimes when I get up to State College, I manage to run into her. But I don't think I've seen Matt Pantano since almost this show. Like, probably right around 2000 is like the last time that I ever saw Matt Pantano. It's almost like that Neil Young song.
Yeah. Another.
But I don't know that he's passed away, and I don't want to suggest that. But, like, I just don't know where he is. So, Matt, if you hear this, then, let us know, where you are. I hope you're okay. But it was funny because we drove down his beat-up truck, and it was just 3 of us sitting across the front seat, and his window wouldn't roll up. So I know when we got to the venue, he actually removed the ignition from the steering column and brought it in with him for the show, so that no one could steal the car, because
I remember that as well.
I guess his car was just so shoddy, you could just turn the ignition and turn it on or something.
Yeah.
And then the window was rolled down.
Yeah.
So I remember that. And we were actually, you and I were chatting about this show ahead of time, and weren't really sure exactly if we had met up somewhere on the way or where that was. But I'll let you speak to who was with you in your car and whatnot.
I don't really remember. We were discussing this a little bit in preparation for the podcast, and one of the things about this show is Ween played the Electric Factory 2 years in a row, almost I think to the day, like the summer of '99, which is this show that we're talking about, and then they played again in the summer of 2000. So when I think back on these shows in my memory, it's hard to distinguish between the two a little bit. I'm with you. They kind of blend together in my memory. There's a few things that sort of stick out about this show and this day. But as far as actually who went, it's a little tough. I know it was at least me in the car, our friend Mike, and I think our friends Matt and Mark. But those other 2 guys I don't. I know at least me and Mike were in the car, because I remember talking to him and some of the conversations that he and I had. But as far as the other 2 guys, I don't really recall, and I'm sorry to do that. And I can't remember which one of us drove and what car we were driving.
So are you telling me that there was 2 Matts, a Mike, and a Mark?
Yeah, there's a lot of M's. It's like a Twin Peaks thing or something. I don't know.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
So yeah, but I do remember the parking lot. So we were in a lot that was. It's not really that far away. I think it kind of felt that way at the time, but
so it goes back to we had only been to Philly a few times at this point in our lives, and we're still pretty young, so it's definitely was the case that showing up there was a little disorienting. It's not we really truly knew exactly where we were in Philly. It's kind of still in that era of these are the directions to get to the venue, and you just sort of follow direction.
Yeah,
and you don't really know what else is going on.
I think this might have been one of those deals where there's the dudes that are that have the flags that are just concert parking this way, and they're just trying to direct you to their parking lot, which is a block and a half away. Whereas there definitely is a parking lot of the Electric Factory in and around the building because I've parked in it. You know what I mean? So I think we may have gotten a little suckered into like, come down here, park in our lot, you know, like that kind of thing. So it was a little intimidating for us because we were basically just kind of like at their mercy and just like being like very naive kids who had only been to Philadelphia a couple of times before this, and it's just kind of like, okay, but it wound up being fine. It did wind up being fine.
I mean, but also, dude, that's just how it works. Like, a guy's got a flag, and you pay him, and you park. Like, and then you go to the show.
Right. We
were just ignorant, you know, yokels.
Yeah, I do remember feeling a little bit weary about it, but yeah, just because we were so naive, and we were walking like to the show from the parking lot, and right behind where the lot was, there was some kind of like garage. There was some kind of like guys like working on like cars and stuff. And this is still like the daylight hours when we got there and everything. So stuff is like still like going on. And I remember Mike pointing to the garage and just being like, "That's the chop shop." And I didn't know what that terminology, like, well, I didn't know what he meant. I'm like, "What does that mean, chop shop?" And he's like, "Oh, that's where they like pull your car in, just like strip it down for like everything that's worth something, and then just leave like a pile of like rubble behind, you know." And I was just like, "Oh man," you know, like I thought he was like being serious, and of course he's just like fucking with me, like as if that's really gonna happen. But you know, I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." You know, so.
He's very worldly. He knew all about,
right,
you know, the seedy side of Philadelphia.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I do remember the other dude, Matt, taking the. It was like, so how big was the ignition? Like that was the thing I don't remember.
I don't know how big that kind of thing is. It's just like something in your hand, I guess.
Yeah,
you know, it's not like super huge.
Yeah, right.
But it's still like a thing.
But yeah, that was his like that was his method of like, oh, no one's gonna steal my truck if I just take this thing out of here. You know?
Yeah, I wonder if you can even bring those in nowadays. Like, this is like pre 9/11, you know?
Right. I mean, like, what was the thing that he had, the ignition, and well, whatever. I mean, we know that he got into the show and no one had any problems with it at the time.
It all worked out in the end.
Yeah, like
it all worked out in the end, and the car was there when we got out of the venue.
Yeah,
so
and it was there when we got out. But it's fine. Like, I think we did have to go through a metal detector. So I don't remember like what like had happened, but I wonder if they were just like, "Yeah, what is this?" And him just being like, "Oh, it's the ignition of my truck." You know, like, yeah, that's sort of the question I want to know. It's like, whatever happened to that dude, and whatever happened to that truck's ignition? You know, that's...
Yeah, so Matt, if anyone knows Matt from State College back in the day, you know, and where he is, and if you can chime in, that would be so awesome.
Yeah, but
Matt, we miss you.
I definitely remember him taking that out of the truck, so that was a smart move on his part. But everything wound up being fine. So
yeah, everything was fine, and so, you know, we get into the Electric Factory, and the Electric Factory is a pretty good venue. It's kind of a rectangle with a couple different levels. Is it 2 or 3? 2? I guess the one's a balcony.
Yeah, I think it's just 2 levels.
But it's such that you have good opportunities for views from a lot of different places. And we were pretty far up, a little bit on the left, as I remember it. And the show, we were thinking it was sold out, but it was definitely full. We stayed up near the front for most of it, so I didn't get it. Like, I don't remember even like leaving for the bathroom. So like, you know, I didn't get a full sense of the crowd because I was near the front. Like, I didn't see the whole crowd behind me. But
yeah, the Electric Factory is definitely more of like a long and narrow kind of place, whereas like, you know, we had been to the shows at the Trocadero, and that's more of kind of like a wide, you know, not so long.
Yes, but the Electric Factory is definitely larger.
Yeah, the Electric Factory holds a lot more people, and it's very long. It's not quite so wide, but it's very long. But yeah, it was definitely
well,
like
and the bars at the back.
Yeah, the bar is in the back, and then there's a balcony also, which holds, you know, a decent amount of people. So between the regular
the last time I was at the Electric Factory was I was up on the balcony.
Yeah, totally.
For a show.
So definitely a big...
Not for a Ween show.
Definitely a bigger venue than the Troc, and a good size crowd. I think it was sold out, but I don't
Yeah.
know that for sure. But one way or another, it was a good crowd that night for that show.
Yeah, and so in Claude's band, Amandla opened the show. We hope that we pronounced that correctly. We realized we were couldn't remember how to pronounce that.
Yeah,
But,
some
so anyone want to help us out, that's cool.
Yeah,
But Claude's band opened,
Yeah,
which was cool.
great.
And a quick little side note is that I actually also saw Claude's band, Amandla, in Eugene, Oregon, many years later, when I just happened to go out to a bar, and there was a poster on the wall, and his band just happened to be playing that night. And so, Claude, if you're listening to this, I was doing the crane, like the Karate Kid. I was doing the crane dance. So anyway, that was a cool show at that bar, by the way. But a quick little side note.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know if I ever saw his band other than that night. Opening for Ween at the Electric Factory, but I definitely have both of their CDs, and the first one, both of them are good, but the first one, Falling Alone, is very good. So if there's anybody out there who's never heard that CD, check it out. It's Falling Alone by Amandla. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Still don't know how to say it, but great. Amandla.
Something.
Great band, and a couple of great albums there. Totally.
I Google searched before we got on tonight exactly these words. I wrote, "How do you pronounce Amandla Claude?" And it didn't give me an answer.
Claude. Get Claude in there.
But awesome. But yeah, so anyway, I mean, that takes us up to the show. Do you have any other things you want to say before we
I do remember Claude's band being very cool. It was the first time we had ever heard them. And I do remember it being really
totally,
cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was definitely great. And it was a festive beginning to the evening, as we'll about to mention and a little bit later about Claude for the evening and things that make this show special.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
But yeah, so him opening with that band, that was definitely made the show special, and it was definitely a great way to get things
great
started.
treat.
Yeah, for sure. So you want me to read the set list?
Yeah, please do.
All right, so here's the set list. So we got Take Me Away, Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy, The Golden Eel, Spinal Meningitis, The Grobe, The Mollusk, Waving My Dick in the Wind, Mr. Richard Smoker, Even If You Don't, Voodoo Lady, What Diener Was Talking About, Piss Up a Rope, The HIV Song, Buckingham Green, Roses Are Free, Mutilated Lips, Nan, Dr. Rock, Fat Lenny, Ocean Man, Bananas and Blow, Pumpin' for the Man, Awesome Sound, Homo Rainbow, Push a Little Daisies, Baby Bitch, Booze Me Up and Get Me High, Stroker Ace Going Into You Fucked Up, LMLYP, and then the encore, The Blarney Stone, Buenos Stars Amigo, and Hot for Teacher.
Nice.
That's a long set list. That era of Ween, they played a lot of shows, and the shows were fairly long.
Yeah, that's a long night of Ween, and that was a
Yes.
standard length show at the time,
Yeah, it clocks in on YouTube a little over 3 hours, and I think that includes the set break or most of the set break and whatnot. And so yeah, it's a pretty good length for a show, and that's a good amount of songs. So so the if we want to talk about some highlights, the one of the things that this show, it's interesting because it's in Philadelphia, and it's the last show of the tour. So we had seen them previously in Toronto, one of the first shows of the tour, and this is now 25. 28, 30 shows later. And so it's awesome because it's in Philly and it's the last show of the tour, so it's kind of like there's this vibe to it. There's definitely, you can tell there's extra energy, and seems like there's always extra energy when it's in Philly, and to have it be the end of the show, the end of the tour. So they there was a lot of banter. There was sometimes there was longer gaps between songs because there was some sort of more banter going on because they were having fun up there. And so before the show, they mentioned that they'd been touring for 6 weeks, and this is the last show. And then also it's cool because they announced that it's Claude's birthday at midnight. And so that's one of the awesome things about the show that made it special was that you had Claude opening up with his band, and then it's like, wow, it's going to be his birthday at midnight. So it was, so there was just this great energy to it, and so just starting off, they just had this like cool banter. They opened with "Take Me Away," which I don't know if that's, I know that that's an opener other times, but I don't know how often that's like if that's a classic opener or not. But one of the things that I remember is that it starts loud, and like a lot of the show is just like blasted out, like they were just like really high energy.
Yeah, totally. And they mentioned a bunch of times about it's great to be back, and like this is the last show of the tour, and also that it's Claude's birthday, so you can tell that like they're relieved and they're just like having fun with it, and it's just like, okay, hometown show, that this is the end of the tour, and you know what I mean, it just has a very kind of like fun, light mood to the whole night.
Absolutely.
They keep mentioning that it's like, oh, it's going to be Claude's birthday soon, and just like it's just just a great, like you said, great banter in between the songs, and just a great time. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of like loud rock in your face in this show.
They play "Don't Get Too Close" as the second song, I believe, and I always love it when they play that. I know it's not like a rarity, but I always get jacked up when they play "Don't Get Too Close."
Yeah, I love that one too. Totally. At the beginning of Golden Eel, not to bring it, the mood down or anything like that, but there's like a feedback problem. So every time, the music is fine, but like every time that Gina goes to sing one of the lines, it just does like a loud like like that, and you can't hear like the first like couple of words.
Totally.
Of the song, like of the line. And he kind of just like brushes it off at first, like, oh, okay, well it'll stop after. And then it's like after like 3 or 4 lines of him going to do the lyrics of the song, you can tell he gets like pissed off for a second. And I remember that too. Like I remember him looking like to the side of the stage after it happens for like the 4th time, and just yelling like, "Hey, what the fuck? Like get that fixed," or whatever. Like, and then after that it stops and it doesn't happen again for the rest of the night. But it's just kind of like one of those things of just like, whoa, like why is that doing that? But they fixed it and it was fine. But you can hear it when you listen to the recording of this show.
I don't know, if I was on stage, I bet it would be even more annoying.
Yeah, but I do remember him getting like pissed off there, like, hey, like, fix that, whatever's causing that, fucking fix it, but just a real quick, like, technical difficulty, didn't stop the song, they didn't stop playing or anything, like that, but those things happen from time to time. Voodoo Lady has a nice jam and definitely has the talk box, which is like the tube. We had talked about that in some of our earlier episodes. Like this night definitely has Diener rocking out on the tube.
He definitely rocks that out, and they definitely rock Voodoo Lady out. This is definitely a big jam.
Yeah, I mean that at the time was, for the most part, always a good long jam. I don't think they really jam it out as much anymore as they did back in those days. But that, at the time, Voodoo Lady was usually a pretty extensive jam out.
Yes. But it was just a good rendition. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I always enjoy Voodoo Lady. When they do what Diener was talking about, Diener sends that out. He says, this is going out to my new wife, Sarah, which not to get into the personal side of Jeter and Diener, but I don't think that he's married to her anymore. But he throws that in there, and then they play what Diener was talking about, which everyone knows and loves.
It is what it is. So be it.
And then,
but yeah, they excuse me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that Roses Are Free is kind of we were talking about this before the show, and ends up being a bit of a focal point for this show. Do you want to do kind of say a little bit about that, and I'll chime in?
Well, sure. So, we talked about this in some of our earlier episodes as well. Everyone knows that Phish has covered Roses Are Free, and it was sort of before Ween could really make like a live version of it. It happened in the mid 90s, and I'm sure that they just liked the song and started playing it in their heavy rotation, but their regular live rotation, whatever.
Yeah, they played it a few times. Phish played it a few times, like 6-7 times or so in 97 and 98, I believe, that kind of era, and 99, and like for the first time in December of 97.
Okay.
Show.
Okay, yeah. So it was 2 years before the this tour that we're talking about. So basically, this is the first tour where Ween had really sort of like started bringing it out. And for this night, it's kind of funny because Jeter says this one goes out to John Fishman, who's in the house tonight. John Fishman is the Phish drummer. So it's like, whoa, like Fishman's in the house tonight, So they're about to play Roses Are Free, and then Diener chimes in, and he's just like, Phish has played it, means we have to play it. So it's a little bit of, like, oh, is there some animosity there?
It's funny because I had alluded to it, we mentioned it before in a couple podcasts, but I always had that little like bit of like, sort of angst with like, man, people think it's a Phish song, and right. It's interesting because I didn't realize any of this. I learning, doing a little bit of research before, talking tonight, I kind of just discovered all this, and I didn't realize that there actually was like a story behind it. I hadn't really made the John Fishman connection when we were actually at the show. To be honest, because I've never been a big Phish person, and back then I just didn't even know like even their names. I just knew they were Phish, and so then it's interesting because one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at some of the things for the show is that they played this show in Toronto, and one of the things that I commented during the Toronto podcast is that was the 7th time that was ever played.
Yeah, so that was really early.
And I was thinking, I remember my comment during that podcast was I can't believe a song that's played so often from Chocolate and Cheese. Here we are in '99, and it's only the 7th time it's ever been played. I made that comment, and so
right.
And by the time we get to Philadelphia, it's the 32nd time it's been played. So they're basically playing it every show, or almost every show on this tour.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't actually gone and looked at every show.
Well, it must have been because, if that was only the 7th time, you'd have to count up how many shows happened in between these two. But
that's a lot because they had a lot of shows.
It must have been, or maybe there was 1 or 2 nights where they didn't play it. But, I would assume that they played it every night of that tour if it's up to that many at this point then,
Yeah, and so I discovered that, and this is from an discussion of the history of Roses Are Free on the Phish.net website, but I discovered that earlier in this tour in Seattle, that Jeter apparently they introduce it by saying that they're trying to take it back from Phish, and so I didn't even realize that, and then they played all these times, and then to have them sort of mention that John Fishman's there, like that's kind of. It's interesting. I didn't realize all of that drama was happening and whatever was going on there. And so
yeah,
I think I want to say that like that people have sort of made amends and have, so it's not like a thing. But it's just interesting that at the time there was this little tiff about Roses Are Free, and I didn't, because to be honest, everyone out there, like, it's kind of, to me, I always felt like, man, it's kind of the overplayed, song, and I like the song. I don't have any, I love it, but just to say that it's kind of played a lot, and sort of like a lot of times when I hear it, I'm kind of like, can we hear something else now? At a live show, and and I'll even comment when it's like, oh, this show didn't have Roses Are Free. Like, it's almost a big deal when the show doesn't have Roses Are Free now. And so I'm on the record for that. But nevertheless, I didn't realize, it's interesting that all of this plays into the entire history of that song.
Right. One other thing about that, and we'll get to this sort of at the end too, but towards the end of the show, the Reverend Bill Fowler, comes out to play guitar. And I do remember, I think it might have been Mike pointing this out to me that night. If it wasn't that, then I definitely remember hearing about it and reading about it like afterwards. But he had like a piece of tape on his guitar when he came out, and written on it like in like black marker was "fuck fish" with a PH, fuck. And
that's clever.
I think it was Mike who like saw it and like said like, oh, it's his "fuck fish" on his guitar. But it, from what I remember from either us noticing it or, like I said, I definitely like reading about it like after the show, that definitely happened. So I don't know if that was just one of those things of like, oh, well, if you guys are going to be, polite about it, I'll be the one who's just going to be like a blatant like asshole about it. Like,
yeah, I don't know the full ins and outs of that, but it's
that's
funny.
That's kind of what I would assume is like, like B.L. is just like, oh, I'll just tell him to go fuck himself while he's here tonight,
Dude, you bring a show back to Philly for the final, night of the tour, and shit's gonna go down.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, so that was notable. Bananas and Blow has this great extended intro. It's almost like the salsa dance or something, It's like really cool. Glenn sounds great on Bananas and Blow, was something that I noted.
Right. Well,
Jeter like opens. It's funny because he introduces the song. He's like, "We're gonna bring a tropical feel," and then it totally does. Like that intro's totally does, and like they don't do that intro all the time.
Yeah. And real quick, we talked about this on a couple of our other episodes. Because we talked about 2 shows from this year. One at the beginning of this tour, like we mentioned, from Toronto, and then the January 1st 99 show. But here we are again. It's the end of, the Painting the Town Brown tour, and we're hearing some White Pepper songs, and you have to remember, like, White Pepper isn't out yet, So
yeah, totally.
And by this time they had been playing these songs pretty much like that whole year of 99. So we might have been starting to get to know them a little bit. Anything that they had played from the January 1st show, at least, like I know that we had like gone back and listened to those, those songs and whatnot. But, you're mentioning Bananas and Blow. It's like, okay, so it's not really finished yet. It hasn't been finalized yet. Still like a new song.
Yeah.
And there's a couple more that we'll talk about. Even If You Don't was in there. And what else did they play from White Pepper?
I think I have it listed down.
Oh, The Grove?
Yes, The Grove, which was one of the earlier times that was played, which was cool. The Awesome Sound is one of the rarities on this show.
Totally.
It was like, when that came on, and it was a jam, and I probably wasn't super familiar with it at the time, because this is still back in the day, and so I might not have, I can imagine myself not picking up on it, but then shit just got brown, like, when Awesome Sound comes out, the shit gets brown.
Yeah, man.
And it was actually like kind of funkadelic, like it was interesting, like, and that's another thing is I don't know how many times I've heard Awesome Sound live. I'm not sure if it's played that way in other times, but it was cool. Like, it was a good rendition, for sure.
Yeah, totally awesome. And I would say that's pretty rare. You know,
Yes.
I may have heard that, one or two more times after this, 2 or 3 times. That was probably it.
Yeah, it was played about 103 times total.
Right.
So,
that's pretty
low.
low.
I don't know. I'd have to look through to see exactly when.
Yeah, that's pretty low in the count
see.
overall.
Yeah. And then another one, Homo Rainbow, is notable because that's pretty rare. Jeter was joking that it's a very special. This next song is a very special song to us. And as they're like getting it started, he like speaks to the crowd. He's like, "This is for you." Or he was looking back at Claude. I don't know, because then afterward he mentions that it's for Claude for his birthday, and he's sort of joking about, "Is it midnight yet?"
Yeah.
Which is cool. I always love hearing "Baby Bitch" for some reason, and I noticed that the intro is always a little different. It's a really short intro, but it was cool because Glenn just like tickles the keys a little bit, and there's just this little bit of guitar, and so it's like a really, for me, it's just a quick highlight, I guess.
Right.
And and so you already mentioned Reverend B.L. comes out, so he plays from Stroker Ace, You Fucked Up, in LMYP. And LMYP, this is another one of those classic, like, it's 22 minutes long. There's great solos, like at the end, like all the different solos they do. Glenn's solo is awesome. Like, I love Glenn. Glenn is awesome. I love his solos. All that instrumental stuff is fantastic, and he's spot on. I mean, Ween is rocking and rolling at this point, in the 1999, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely. This is
and you can also. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that this is a great rendition of LMLYP. It's not quite as long as the New Year's show that we saw. When I was re-listening to the show, it clocks in at about 22 minutes. And
yes.
The other thing is, this is the last song before the encore. So, like, this is still, like, part of, like, the regular, set. This is still part of, like,
totally.
the regular night. Whereas, like, we went to see the New Year's show, and that was, like, the encore. That was, like, the last thing that happened. So they've moved it up so it's just, like, the end of the regular set. And it's still 22 minutes.
Yeah. And it's cool because Reverend B.L., I definitely, the intro seems a little different, and I think I'm listening to it, not seeing the the show, but thinking that you can hear B.L.'s guitar kind of wailing away a little bit there, which is cool. Gives it a slightly different flavor.
Yeah.
It was a great way to end the regular set. And then you have your, standard, like, I think they step off stage for a couple minutes and then come back for the encore. The Blarney Stone is notable because this is like it's a ribald song to begin with. Like, they get kind of raunchy. But there's that part where they just start talking about all his ailments, and that's usually like part of the live show. And I just remember one of the ones, he's like, "There's tumors on my sack."
Yeah, and before he starts talking about all the ailments, he's like, "Kirk, let me get some of that, man." Like, "Kirk, do you hear me, man?" And then they give him like all the echo, and it's just
yeah, it's
just
great.
all, like,
no,
distorted.
It's fantastic. So
yeah.
And it's one of those songs where, like, if I had to be honest, it would be low ranked in terms of my total echelon of Ween songs. No offense, but like when it's played live and it's this ridiculous and they're just like doing this, I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so that's so they're coming back for the encore and doing Blarney Stone, and then they start talking about. The birthday boy is something he'd like to do, because it's Claude's birthday, or it's almost his birthday at this point. I don't know exactly what time it is. And then I guess he's got to be off stage, so bathroom break or something. So they're like, "Oh, we'll do a quick bueno before the birthday boy gets back out," or whatever. Then they play Buenos Stars Amigo.
Yeah, I think he's like, Jeter's like, "Okay, well, let's do a quick bueno. We got to make this like 11 minutes," because they're like, "Oh, it's like 11 like 50 or whatever." Okay, so what can we do for 11 minutes? Because then it's
Oh
gonna be
yeah,
Claude's
yeah.
birthday.
You're right. You're right. That's funny.
Yeah.
No,
So,
yeah. That makes a lot of sense
but
now
I
because it
but I
ends up being
love
about 12 minutes long.
yeah, I love how Junior's like, we'll do a quick bueno, and it's like because we got 11 minutes. It's like, oh, that's real quick, like that's perfect length. It winds up being like the perfect length, actually. But
Yeah, no, and they're like jamming it out, and like it's loud, and it's not like a quiet version of the song at all, and they're definitely just like making it go a little longer, a little bit longer
yeah,
to get it in.
you can tell if you listen back to it, it's like the regular like pacing and everything, and then Diener just starts like into like a guitar like solo of just all right, I'll just make some shit up. Like let's just jam it out, and it's just Diener just starts it just like tearing it up on guitar with just random shit. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no,
a
it's
very
great.
cool rendition of Ween.
Yeah, and right at the end, Jeaner's like, they're like doing the little jam at the end before he's like, "We'll see each other again."
Yeah.
Like, and he's about to do that part, and he has like a line where he's like talking to the crowd. He just is like, "Brothers and sisters," something to that. Like that's what he says. I don't know if I'm getting the tone
Yeah.
right, but he sort of just is like, "Brothers and sisters, we'll see each other again,"
Yeah.
which is fun. And so they're having fun, and that's what's one of the memorable things about the show, because it's Claude's birthday, and so then they sing "Happy Birthday," which is cool. And then of course Claude, if people aren't familiar, one of the Claude songs, it's almost like it's going to be, it's like "Hot for Teacher," and so they play "Hot for Teacher," which is a pretty rare song in the grand scheme of things. Although this was sort of like the "Hot for Teacher" like era,
Yeah.
like from like '98 or so to like the early 2000s, like it was played pretty commonly. So like it was definitely not the first time we heard it or anything, but it's always a classic like Claude song. So
Yeah, and it's still pretty. Yeah, it's pretty low on the total times played list on Brown bass. But yeah, they were doing that a lot in this like era of the shows. Totally.
yeah, and we also had a question. So apparently, like Jeaner is like, this is going out to Jay Sanchez, our roadie, and Jay Sanchez, our roadie, is gonna play in on the song on guitar. On Brown bass, it says it's Jay Fernandez. So I'm not sure, who that is. If someone knows that person, can give a shout out. Like, so I'm wondering if it's Jay Sanchez or if it's Jay Fernandez, or maybe it's Jay Sanchez Fernandez. I don't know. Maybe it's Sanchez Fernandez, but he goes by Jay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just was wondering if anyone might know.
I'm hoping that his real name is Jay Fernandez, but they just call him Jay Sanchez just because it sounds so much better. I just love Sanchez. Just sounds great to me.
Yeah, I mean, anyway. So if anyone out there in the
Whoever he was,
web universe can clue us in.
whoever
That'd
he
be great.
was, he must have had a great voice because you can hear him come on and like introduce himself and just say like "Happy Birthday" to Claude and like, "Oh yeah, Claude is the man," and it's just like this real gruff sound and like, "Yeah, what's going on?" Like he just has this real like.
He's got a great roadie voice.
Yeah, he's right. He sounds like a roadie. Exactly. That's a good. So whoever he is, he's the man, and he sounds awesome. So
Yeah. So yeah. So anyway, yeah, man. That's the show, and as I mentioned, it clocks in at like 3:02, and so that's a pretty good length. Even though it also includes some downtime, and there's the banter, which slows the songs down, but it's still part of the evening in a way. So it's a great length for a show, and a lot of great songs. Like in terms of like great performances, renditions of songs. So.
absolutely.
And yeah, so the one thing that I noticed, I was looking at Brown Bass, and so I thought it was a great show, and there's all this banter, and it's like this exciting night in Philadelphia, last show of the tour, etc., Claude's birthday, etc. So it's interesting because it ends up being listening back, it's like, wow, this is a good show. But when you look at the numbers, ends up being almost like, for lack of a better word, like a quote unquote like regular Ween show. Like at this point in the tour, most of the songs that they're playing are like being played almost every night. And so it's almost like, if you had seen them, like 4 nights in a row, like leading up to Philadelphia, all the shows would have been pretty similar.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because they were doing that, and I get it. It's a natural thing. They toured for 6 weeks straight, basically, like 30 shows or whatever. And so that starts happening. I think it's inevitable sometimes. But it's interesting that nevertheless, this show still ends up being like quite memorable and solid. It is a bummer. There weren't a lot of like real rarities. Like we mentioned, I think Hot for Teacher is the rarest jam song. It's 65 times. Homo Rainbow comes in at 100 times played, which is pretty rare. And then we also mentioned Awesome Sound. So like nothing like super rare. Like we had the last podcast we did was the Pittsburgh show recently, and there were songs that were like, in like the single or double digits as far as times played.
Right.
And then also like, when we talk about the Toronto show we were at, there was like, North Pappy Flappy and stuff, and so like that craziness. And yet, so in that regard, there wasn't a lot of rare stuff, but there was still some.
The one thing that I'll say about that is, they also might have been thinking, okay, it's Philly, it's the last night of the tour. We don't want to throw in anything that's going to be too obscure or something that they might not like have together as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like let's put on a good
sense,
show.
for sure.
Let's put on a good show for Philly. It's the first time we're at the Electric Factory. Something like that. Whereas like you mentioned the Toronto show, North Pappy Flappy, and that whole like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar jam that they did before LMLIP. It's like they're just fucking around, and it's like they're not in their hometown. They're in fucking Toronto, Canada. It's just a random night. It's just a random fucking show.
It's just a brown show in Toronto.
Let's just get fucking weird.
Early in the tour,
right? Let's just get fucking weird with it. Whereas like this night, not saying anything bad about it, but it's like let's play all the shit that we have like together. So maybe that might have been like the mentality. Not a complaint really, but I agree with what you're saying. It's like there isn't really anything that gets too outrageous. By this time, LMLIP even is kind of like, okay, you do a solo, you do a solo, you do a solo, you do a solo, and then we'll wrap it up. Like everybody gets to do like their solo, and then so they even have that sort of down. Not that it doesn't rock. I mean, it's fucking awesome, but it's not so much of that just real. Hey, let's just do whatever kind of thing. So
some of the.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, Awesome Sound was a great jam.
Awesome Sound, yeah.
That was a little bit rare. And, but yeah, so, the most of the songs at this show were from Chocolate and Cheese and The Mollusk. And then they also had 4 from White Pepper. So it was a lot of songs from that, like, most recent era, right? Like, the era of the 5-piece band, right? So, so that's what you got at this show. And I was looking, and there's a short list. The songs that weren't really being played every night that were at this show was Stroker Ace. Wasn't like just every night during this tour. Nan wasn't. Booze Me Up and Get Me High wasn't really. And then Awesome Sound. Everything else was basically like kind of recurring during the show.
Yeah. Like we had mentioned before, you got some new songs, new songs at the time. Even if you don't, I'm pretty sure that was the first time we had heard that. I think we had heard
so.
The Grobe. Yeah, I think we might have heard that before at the New Year's show and at the Toronto show, but I think it was the first time that we had heard, even if you don't. And then we had mentioned Bananas and Blow, there again. So this may have been,
but that was on heavy rotation for this tour.
Right.
Was,
so,
but it was still great early rendition.
Yeah, it's still early, so it's like that winds up being like one of like the favorites, and they play all the time. But at this point, there's still new songs, that haven't come out yet. So that's cool. Throw some new shit in there. You know what I mean? So a lot of the people that had just seen them for this show, and that was the only shows that they made it to for that year, those would have been, brand new to them. So that's cool.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I say, overall, dude, it was a great show. Great show. And it's fun. It's kind of hilarious listening back because, man, my memory is not nearly as good as reality. And
Yeah.
so picking up on some of those finer details,
Yeah.
like I totally didn't catch that shit back then.
Well, like we had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this is one of those shows that gets kind of like jumbled in, the memory and going back. It's like, oh, those Electric Factory shows. But going back and listening to it again and listening to the whole thing, it's like, it is a great show. And,
Yeah.
maybe not too many of like the rarities, but definitely everything is well put together for this show. And a great listen if you're just looking for a whole show. Good quality bootleg too. I want to thank the YouTuber. You can go on YouTube and listen to this now. And that's Boognish Bockwinkel, who we'd given a shout out to him a couple of times before. If you want to listen to just the whole show in one chunk, just YouTube it. You know what I mean? Sounds great. No complaints. You know what I mean? Great audio.
Yeah, it's a great recording. I enthusiastically would say this would be a recording you could share with anyone. Like say, hey, you want to hear a Ween live show? And you could lay this down, and I think it would be a pretty damn good entree for them to get into Ween.
Yeah.
To your point about it jumbles together, it's like we went to see the Electric Factory again the next year, and we're also in the middle of us going to see them like 4 times a year, like year after year, kind of at this point. Like, so we're starting to rack up a good amount of shows, and so it's totally natural for someone to lead together, and when they're at the same venue. That's like tough. I remember that the second Electric Factory show, I was 21 by then. I guess you were 21 too by then as well.
I may have been, but I don't know. I don't remember.
So I also don't. I have a bad memory because I was first show that I was at, and 21, I think. So like I was totally like drinking too much. But like so anyway, it's kind of like the Electric Factory show is just kind of blended together, and so it's nice but that's why it's nice to have such awesome audio to listen to on YouTube. Thank you, Boognish Bockwinkel.
Yeah, totally, man.
Because you get to go back and listen to it and be like, wow, like I had forgotten a lot of that stuff, and like now it doesn't blend in together because the show has a lot to commend itself on its own.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get out there and listen to it, guys.
Yeah,
get out and listen to it.
Like you're saying, it would be a great show to turn someone on to Ween with, and especially if you have someone who is just like a rock guy and sort of like the more like softer side of Ween might like turn somebody off. This is a good example of a show where it's like there's not that many like quote unquote slow songs. If I
that's
dare
true.
say
You're
so.
right.
It's a very like rockin' show without sort of like that like softer edge, you know what I mean? So that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like they just want to have everything as like a rockin' tune for this night. But we'll sort of wrap it up. So we do go to one more show in '99, which will be our next episode.
Yes.
This was the last show of the Paint the Town Brown tour, like we had mentioned. They played some shows in the fall of '99 as just what's called the fall tour.
Started on Halloween, or I believe.
Yeah, right before Halloween. Right before Halloween, the night of Halloween, and then about 6 or 7 shows after that in November, and that would be the end of the shows for the year. So we won't tell anyone right now which show that we saw. You're gonna have to tune in for the next episode for that. But that will be our next.
Tune back in. You can guess.
Yeah.
Which one could it be?
Yeah.
Which one do we go to?
So that'll be the next episode. And yeah, we want to thank anyone who's listening to this. As we mentioned in the beginning of the show, check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, archive.org. Hit us up. Our email is everything's Weencast Podcast. So it's Weencast Podcast at Gmail, or on Twitter, it's at Weencast Podcast. And please, anything that you have to say, if you were at this show, we'd love to hear about it. Your comments, your questions, anything anybody might have. We'd love to get anything. So hit us up.
Yeah. If you guys, if you have something, if you've been to that show, chime in by all means, guys. We'd love to hear from you guys, and if you can add to what we said, that's awesome. Expand my horizons, man.
Okay.
But yeah, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, everybody, thank you so much for checking this out. And we had mentioned before, go back and listen to some of the previous episodes if this is the first one that you're listening to. We will say again that the first few episodes are not quite there when it comes to the audio quality, but hey, whatever. We're trying to keep a good standard of quality from now on, and I think we've done a decent job of it. I think the shows are sounding okay. So anybody has any comments or anything, hey, hit us up.
Yeah, man, that sounds about right. Great show. Good night.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. We out.
Later.